My name is Brahim Burim and I am an Albanian immigrant in the state of Pennsylvania, where I reside with my wife Kim Burim and my daughter Delina Burim. I am a proud owner of a bakery shop in the north side of Philadelphia next to where I live. To be at this point, I had to work hard and never give up because of all the circumstances that have led me to be here today. Life has not always been the easiest, especially to be at the point where I am today. If I was told that I would be in America 10 years ago, I would have called lie. But here I was to talk about my story. Everything started when I was born in a little town named Tirana in the central part of Albania in the south of Europe in 1870. I live in Tirana most of my youth age before I came to America. I grew up in a family of 2 children out of which I was the oldest, along with our mother and our father. My father was in the military and most of the time was away from the family because of military services. Due to his absence, I was raised mostly by my mother, which I think is one of the reasons of me being the man and the father I am today. My mother was a stay-home mom who did her best possible to give my brother and me the proper education and the proper manners to be a good person in life. Her biggest concern was to make sure we become a great person and a great man, better men than what she wanted our father to be. I think that thought came from the fact that our father had big dependency on alcohol at a time when he would be home. Him being under the influence would always be a bad time at home because of his aggressive behaviors towards my mother, brother, and me. We didn't have much money, which made things on time really difficult. We would sometimes spend nights without eating because of poverty and lack of resources around us. At the time, I was not really aware of everything that was going on in my country. With the help of our mother, we're able to avoid thinking about all the big issues around us. My mother, brother, and I were really close, and we knew almost everything about each other. Even with the constant absence of my father, poverty hitting us and famine continuously growing, my mother always made sure we stay together because she believed that as long as we stay together, everything will be fine. At the time I was around 9 to 10 years old, but everything we had to deal with made me grow mentally earlier than I should have. By the time I turned 10 in 1880, I went out and found a job to help provide for my family in a certain way. The job was to work at a bakery where I would help make bread and deliver them through the whole city every morning. I was not an easy situation for a young person like me, but I was not the only teenager working there, which made me feel better about myself in some ways. That job would go on to and be one of the most important things that would have happened. Why? Because I met one of the most important people in my life. It was the owner of the bakery, Mr. Beer, who would become like a second father for me. He would teach me everything about life and what he thought a man should be and know. He taught me how to properly speak and write our native language, along with multiple life lessons that would help me to shape myself into the man I am. He was a constant source of support and help for me at the bakery and outside of the bakery. He also went on to teach me multiple things about the bakery and how to manage a business and other things. I wasn't making much money, but I was happy to have that opportunity and open-minded spirit. I worked there until I was 15 in 1885. Because we needed the money back at home, so I enlisted in the reserve for the military to see if I could make more to help my mother and brother at home. The one day, everything started going downhill as my mother fell really sick from pneumonia and my father died while serving a couple of months later. It was a tough time that will turn out to be the turning point in my life. As the thing wasn't going bad enough, my mother died a couple of times before our country got invaded by the Ottoman Empire, known today as the Turkish Empire, in 1890. The invasion will mark the beginning of the Secessionist War and Albanian Revolt. The Albanian League of Defense launched a revolution against the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire, which I remember was created by some Turkish tribes from the south of Europe, were really dangerous because of all the power and territory they had. With them wanting to take total control of Albania will cause a big war. With the war raging, I knew it was time for me to leave because of the fear to die. I had to find a way to leave with my brother. I had no idea how or where to go. Mr. Beer gave me an advice to go to this new land of opportunity on the world, Ellis Island in the other side of the world. I could go with my brother, so I asked Mr. Beer to take care of him with the promise of coming back to pay for everything. I needed to get a boat ticket because it was the only way to get there. With the help once again of Mr. Beer and my savings, I was able to buy a cheap ticket in steerage for $20 compared to the $30 everyone else had to pay. With everything ready, it was time for me to leave. The day of my departure came fast. Saying bye to Mr. Beer and my brother was a tough time, but I had to do it for a better life. My journey started when I got into that boat on the 20th of September 1907 from Durs. There was a lot of people that were looking for a new life like myself. There were persons from all around Europe, from France to Italy. Everyone could have been identified from the way they were dressing. There were numerous reasons for immigrants leaving for America. Their reasons were as exclusive and different as the travelers themselves, but religious oppression, political cruelty, and economic hardship were the three main reasons leading immigrants to go on this journey to the land of opportunity. I was really poor at the time with not much savings to have a good place on the boat, especially knowing that there was no limit on the number of third-class tickets that were sold. It resulted in a foolish record of people being filled like livestock into the ship's lesser levels. I had the luck to get a ticket for approximately $20 compared to the $30 priced by the company responsible for the trip thanks to Mr. Beer connections with the people selling tickets. Great profits were made by those steamship companies since it cost them around 60 cents a day on food for each immigrant on each trip. Everything was set and the trip began. I went in the steerage across from another Albanian man, miner who was leaving because of poverty and religious oppression. At that time the steerage was really crowded, but since it was only the start, everything was still clean except for the continuous drop of water that would keep passengers wet on the regular. The floor open for steerage passengers was very limited, and situated in the worst part of the ship, subject to the most violent motion, to the dust from the stacks and the smells from the waste. The only supplies of food were often shelved or placed along the sides of sleeping sections. Toilets and bathrooms were inadequate, never taken care of, and seawater was the only beverage accessible. We were served one meal a day, making it really hard to stay healthy, so we had to adjust to that routine throughout the whole trip. As things went on, the conditions have gotten considerably worse, the amount of food decreased. It got to a point where most immigrants, particularly early arrivals, the experience in steerage was like a living nightmare on a boat where the only way to escape was to jump off the boat. Many people lose their life due to medical complications because on top of being crowded, cold and wet, everything was dark, and we barely had the chance to be outside to get some fresh air because of the number of people. Steerage conditions were unsanitary, foul-smelling due to the absence of care. People including myself were constantly vomiting because of the smell, and with no way to escape or improve the conditions surrounding us, we had to rely on faith to keep us, the belief of a better future in a new place where a new life was about to start for everyone that would make their alive and in good well-being. All of these conditions were obviously aggravated by the crowding. After a couple of weeks, the conditions in the boat got worse and worse as people kept dying and falling sick. Health-wise, I was not in the best conditions either. I started suffering from diarrhea because of malnutrition. It was a tough time of my life because everything was behind me and the living conditions were just getting worse and worse. If it was not bad enough, I woke up a morning to my Albanian friend Dihar dead during the night from cholera complication. The whole trip, I was only hoping not to die, because my health was getting worse each day. But time went on, and we knew arrival was close. To spend time, we would sing popular music of the time. Different music in different languages could have been heard across the boat. We would also play cards and talk among each other to keep our heads away from all the bad conditions that were around us. As the long await of the trip came to an end, most of us were mentally, physically, and emotionally tired, but everything was not over by that time, as we knew that more difficulties are coming our way, especially with all the rumors about how life was going to be in America. With all the stories of people being deported from Ellis Island, where I would be mostly assigned, I got really stressed and I was not sure if I would be able to answer immigration security after I spent some time learning about the new language. But finally, after about a month and 2 weeks of travel, here we were in the new world. Upon our arrival, I knew that I would have to pass some medical examination to be able to have access out of the ship. Because of all the possible contagious diseases that passengers could have contracted, such as cholera, smallpox, and typhoid. I knew that my health condition was not great, but I believed that I was healthy enough to pass that examination. Steerage passengers had to wait about 2 days for all the first and second class passengers to be out of the boat so that we could be examined by medicals inspectors in quarantine areas located at the entrance of the lower bay of New York Harbor. Every passenger went on to be checked, and those who will pass the examination will be redirected to the area of people eligible to access Ellis Island. There will also be people that would fail the exam and be marked with coal, meaning that they would eventually be deported. There would also be people that would be marked for maybe further evaluation of their condition. Coming to my turn, I did not know most of the things they were asking me, so I had to rely on someone named Johnny who knew some concept about Albanian due to the high amount of people coming from Albania. Luckily, I was able to pass the medical exam as well as a couple of questions that were asked by the immigrant officer. From there, I knew that a new life was ahead of me and that the hardest part was behind me. On my way out, the first thing to be seen was Mrs. Liberty, which for me was a sign of a new life at that moment. Tears could have been seen on my eyes because of everything I've been through, from leaving my brother and friends to all the suffering I had to endure during the trip here. Everything was worthy because of the new chapter I was about to write in my life. All the other immigrants were also amazed by Mrs. Liberty, that phrases like, "The bigness of Mrs. Liberty overcame us." No one spoke a word, for she was like a goddess, and we know she represented the big, powerful country which was to be our future home. Beyond Mrs. Liberty, about a mile northwest from New York, was Ellis Island. After all the examinations were over, all the steerage passengers were packed in groups with name tags on top of a barge with their baggage on our way to Ellis Island. As I finally arrived at Ellis Island, everything was so different from where I was from. I came from a poor background, so everything seems to be new compared to what I was used to. As I disembarked from the barge, I was directed to a registry room where we had to answer more questions. As I was making my way to that office, I encountered an Albanian man that was dressed exactly like I was, with our usually Albanian soldier's uniform. At that moment, I felt a big relief knowing that I had one of my soldier brothers here too. I was assigned to the dorm at the lower level, and from there, I was able to start another part of my journey finally after days of non-stop control. I started by walking around the whole island just to have an idea of where I was. There was an insane amount of languages that you could hear from everywhere. The conditions were not the best, but I had to get used to it because I was going to be there for some time. There was a big cafeteria where everyone had to go to get their meal. The food that was served there was typical American, so I struggled a lot to accommodate my stomach to what they were serving there. But after some time, I finally got used to it. Also, there was a hospital where sick people were kept. The system was made that if some would get there in good shape but fall sick after being received there, they would be treated at the hospital on the island, and if their condition would deteriorate, they would have been deported back to where they came from. I was constantly working around helping people from the security to move supplies that arrived at the island. Because of my good attitude, I was given a job as a cleaner at the security office. From that job, I was paid, and I had an extra meal compared to the other immigrants. Even with those advantages, the sanitary conditions were getting worse because of the number of immigrants that kept coming in. The dorms were getting smaller and the amount of food we were getting also decreased. Because of the struggle, I decided that I was going to find a way to get out of there. I kept working hard every day and it paid off when I was called in the office of the immigration where I received my admittance card, which means that I could leave the island and go where I wanted to. After stepping foot out of the train, I knew it was a new beginning for me in this new place. Philadelphia at the time was under construction, different than what it was before I left again. It was not easy to find my way to Robert brother because I was still in the shock that I can finally live a normal life and make a way for my brother and me. I ended up finding Ronald, Robert brother. He took me with him to his place where I was given a single room, which was pretty different than what I was used to at the island and my country. After putting my stuff together, I laid down on the bed and started thinking about my brother and Mr. Beer, because I felt that time was about to come for us to have a new life. I was also really anxious and sad about them because since I left, I have been in contact with them. But I knew that things were getting better because the war has stopped, and the country was getting back together with a little more than before. At the time, there was no efficient way to be in contact with people on a different continent, especially to a place where there was not always light. There was no cell phone, fax, or even airplane to send emails there. But as time went on, technology started to get really big. There was more and more car in the street, airplane came a couple of years later, and we were able to send emails overseas for cheaper and faster processing than using a boat, which would take months to get there and be processed. I was ready to attack this new challenge, therefore a couple days after moving with Ronald, I was used of the Pennsylvania routine and how things worked. I was ready to fulfill my end of the contract, which was again to help him at his restaurant. With previous experience working at food place from my time at Mr. Beer Bakery, the transition was really smooth, and before I even realized, I was Ronald's favorite, because of my work ethics, and my will to always work. I will work 3 more years there while leaving at Ronald Place. During those 3 years, I was able to save money and contact by mail my brother and Mr. Beer. They were alive and well doing. They also wrote that a lot of things have changed a lot since I have left. The road is getting built, there is no electricity in most part of the city, and cars and transportation vehicles have become a big thing there. To have news of my brother and Mr. Beer was big news for me because of all the fear I had of losing the only family I had left. Later on, I will go on to meet the love of my life, Kim, while working at the restaurant. We will go on and get married 7 months after we meet. Also, from her saving and mine, we open our restaurant and bought our own house on the north side of the city. Along with all those blessings, we welcome our first and only daughter Delina in our life in one of the happiest day ever. Around that time, we started to think about going back to Albania to visit and get my brother from there. Luckily, there were airplanes around at the time, which made things much easier in terms of traveling overseas at a higher price, of course. Our business was working well, so we thought that we could take that opportunity. We bought our ticket and went back to Albania. Sadly, Mr. Beer died, but my brother was there working at his bakery and in good shape. Seeing him after that many years was really emotional. We were all in tears, but it was a great moment. We visit our old house, my parents, and Mr. Beer grave before putting everything together and going back to America with my brother. It was a long journey that I thought would have never been possible. With the help of God, determination, hope, and my family, I was able to make it happen, even though it took me a lot of sweat and tears.